Because what we say is, do these harms really exist, Mr. Speaker? Or does this policy of shutting them out, just take them off the public stage, actually do anything to solve them? Alex asked this question, and again, Tate failed to respond. Because we said, all you do is stop the speech. You don't stop the thought. You don't stop them saying it in the private domain, Mr. Speaker. Tate had no response to that. What we say is that leads to you, what you're essentially trying to do is punish people for crimes they might do in the future, for a backlash that might occur, for harms that could happen. They've never proven that these will happen, Mr. Speaker. In fact, these types of harms have occurred only very, very rarely. It's essentially akin to punishing somebody for doing something he will do in the future. You can't predict whether or not he is going to do that, and that's the problem. The second issue with whether or not harms exist is that they just go underground there. And then we ask, is it better to have them underground or out in the open? And here the quintessential debate example that I've been talking about for 5 years again comes up, Mr. Speaker. He talked about far-right groups in Nazi Germany, and we say a lot of that has to do with the fact that they have no avenue to vent their frustration. The popularity for the British National Party, again on the far right, comes from the fact that hate speech has been denied, comes from that they don't feel they've got a legitimate political output. Instead, look at groups like the KKK in America, Mr. Speaker, where they have been allowed to continue to hold rallies, and what you see is counter-rallies, Mr. Speaker. What you see is people standing up and say, no, we think your ideas are bigoted, we think your ideas are wrong. And this is when we, on the government, put the faith in the majority. We think the majority knows sit down. The majority has more than enough common sense to actually go and say, call these people out on being bigots, Mr. Speaker. We don't think you need a paternalistic government structure to tell people what to think. We think that's counterproductive, Mr. Speaker. More to the point, this type of positive dialogue cannot happen when you cannot hear what people are thinking. When these bigots aren't allowed to stand up and say what they want, we don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what they're saying behind closed doors. That's where you ferment disdain and distaste, Mr. Speaker. That's where you ferment the type of xenophobia, anti-religious rhetoric that you see time and again. Closing.
Sir, let's just ask you an empirical question. Because America practices your policy, when have the KKK stopped being haters?
Never! But the point is, you're always going to have haters. Even in Europe, where they do practice your policy, you have haters, Mr. Speaker. The difference is, the KKK is diminishing, whereas now we see far-right groups all over Europe. Far-right groups all over Europe, Mr. Speaker, on the rise. You look at Switzerland in the recent elections, you look at Norway, you look at Finland, all of these groups now have far-right political parties in power, and we think that's damaging, Mr. Speaker. More to the point, we said that there are some things that we should call religions out for, that may very well be offensive to them. Tate said, oh no, you must only look at the extreme. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Catholic Church does find it offensive when I say using a condom is not killing children, Mr. Speaker. It's, as the open opposition said, fundamental to their belief. It's a critical belief of Catholicism, Mr. Speaker. And the other problem is, it's not exactly clear the mechanism, as much as Tate wanted to say, oh no, the Church has a right to decide. It's not exactly clear what would be banned and what would not be banned. You actually run the risk of silencing legitimate political protest when you have a policy like this, because it's up to the whims and fancies of judges, Mr. Speaker, or rather, if anything, they're going to err on the side of caution and practice self-censorship. Stay away from that OB market, because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to be slapped with a fine or with a jail sentence, Mr. Speaker. We think the science is legitimate protest. Second issue on principle, but because I'm feeling generous, opening.
Thank you. So, at the end of the day, if the bigots remains bigots and they are not going to change, what's wrong when you assume that the majority of society who are already enlightened, why can't we just punish these bigots?
Yeah.
Because you're not just punishing the bigots, you're punishing everyone. No, firstly, as I already said, you're stifling legitimate protest. But secondly, we think that there's a principal harm, again, not dealt with throughout this entire side, to silencing free speech on anyone's behalf. Because we don't think we can say, hey, what, you're a bigot, therefore you get no right to say anything. We think that's wrong as well, Mr. Speaker, because they have got rights guaranteed. And we think they should be allowed to voice out their concerns, and I've taken too. So what we say is the role of the state here is really to award maximum liberties, Mr. Speaker, until that threshold of harm set up by the open government is actually crossed. The state doesn't have a right to just come in because, you know what, my core identity is hurt. This was Tate's other idea that he harped on a lot. You know what, I don't have a right to hurt you. Well then, Mr. Speaker, a girlfriend then mustn't have a right to break up with her boyfriend, because, you know what, a relationship is also core to my identity. And it really hurts when people break up. Oh my God, we're forcing people to remain married. No, sit down. So what we say here is this idea of core identity that was already rebutted sufficiently by the government. Tate tried to revive it, but really it's so poorly defined that anything can be included into it, Mr. Speaker. Anything and everything can be included into it. More to the point, they're not standing. What would happen if we did include all these things? Look at things like homophobia. Look at things like xenophobia. Look at things like misogyny, Mr. Speaker. All of these things we could no longer have a legitimate political discourse about. It would be marked as out of bounds by the political elite, Mr. Speaker, by side opposition. We think that it's better to get these views out in the open, have an actual rational discussion about what people are doing, when we would trust the majority of people to be able to follow that discussion. We also say, as Alex told you about, and again, Tate didn't respond to, that this favours religion disproportionately. It means that you can only say good things about religion, and you can't call them out for the things that they do wrong. We've told you that there's a fundamental belief of atheists to be free from this type of persecution, Mr. Speaker. Again, they haven't dealt with that. The final issue is on the idea of religious groups. Again, I'm going to go over this very quickly, because one, I'm out of time, and two, Tate didn't deal with it. We told you that many groups are defined in opposition to other religious groups. You look at the Protestants, you look at the things like the Catholic Church introducing prayer that begs for the forgiveness of the Jews, Mr. Speaker. A lot of these things are offensive, but falls within their own religious freedoms. How do you adjudicate that? We also told you there are problems within religious groups that now won't be called out, such as polygamy within the Mormon Church. For those reasons, Mr. Speaker, we are very proud to stand on the side of freedom of speech. We are very proud to propose.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 27 seconds. I thank the government whip for his speech. Now I would like to call upon the opposition whip to close the case for their side and the debate as a whole.
You want to take the so you can't do you can take mine. I can hear. Yeah. Hello.
The absolute freedom to speak, Mr. Speaker, does not make for a perfect world of perfect information and individual autonomy and common decency and respect. What it does make for is an anarchical kind of society where individuals feel that it is no longer necessary to accord a base level of respect for fellow human beings simply because they are human. The bitching of this side of the House was simple. It is difficult to adjudicate exactly where we are supposed to draw the line when it comes to offense. But a difficulty in trying to ascertain precisely where that line should be does not necessarily mean that you must err or simply delete the existence of that line. States make this decision all the time, and the state is capable of making this decision. This debate revolved around three things. First, does adopting this policy lead to harm to the individual? Something that they contested. Second, is maintaining a culture of respect and common decency in relation to democratic discourse a bad thing? Well, lastly, I want to talk about society's greater good. Those will be my 3 points of clash. To the first, no. We suggested in Tate's speech that there is a need to reimagine our conception of harm, because it is extremely simplistic for this side of the House to paint harm as simply being assaulted or kicked or beaten up or gay bashed or whatever. We say, Mr.